Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Writers Room with Sam and Jim. This is a show where we bring aspiring writers into our writers' room to help them work on and develop their story. And we're going to do that with Stacy Lumbrezer in just a little bit.
But first, Jim wants to go off about something.
So what I've been thinking about is how do you, when you're writing something, how do you convey what the characters are feeling in a way that lets the reader know what's going on without overwriting it so much that it gets in the way of actually telling the story?
Right, and this comes up all the time because what sometimes people do in a script is they give you all this choreography. Like someone comes in the room and then they pick up a mallet and then they walk over to the other person and they beat them to death. And you're like, well, why did they do that? And you can explain it in the story. You should always know, or the reader should always know, why is the actor or character doing what they're doing.
Right, and it gets really complicated, right? Because when you're actually working with actors, right, there's in scripts you have parentheticals where you say angry or irritated or amused or something like that.
Actors hate that, by the way.
They hate that. It's the first thing you do in a production script is cross all those out because they don't want to be told how to act the part.
Yeah, it's insulting to them.
But if you're trying to read a script or if you're writing a spec script, you want to send in and have people read it. I mean, we're writing a spec script right now. Like, how do you tell the reader what they need to know without overburdening the script with a bunch of stuff that gets in the way?
I think you don't. I think you just act it out for them. That's the only way. That's the only way you can get it across. And just so we're clear, there's no right way because I can write a scene where I'm like, how can this be interpreted any other way?
And then I'll read it and I'm like, why did you write a comedy scene when this guy's killing the other guy? And you're like, this isn't funny. And I'm like, I know it's not funny, but it looks like you're trying to be funny.
Okay, I was actually stepping outside of you and thinking to people that don't know us or executives who have not, they're reading 70 scripts and now they just read this one or whatever it is. How do they miss it sometimes?
Well, yeah, and for me, and getting serious, I read a pilot for a young writer not long ago, a new writer, and one of the first things I noticed was that when he first introduced the characters, you have this golden opportunity when you introduce a character, and there's a standard in TV writing where it's like, whatever, you say 3 or 4 words about the character and a little parenthetical, give their age, whatever. Mm-hmm. Or you can take a line or 2 lines and actually introduce us to the character. Mm-hmm. I remember in a very early script of ours, we introduced a guy as someone who never met a get-rich-quick scheme. He couldn't slow to a crawl.
Right.
And you come out of that with a really strong impression of who this guy is. You have a sense of the character. And as you read deeper in the script, you have some idea of who he is when he's in a scene, even if you're not saying anything about it.
You wrote that line, and I remember laughing my ass off when I read it, but now I wonder if that's too clever. And that goes into another idea.
It was a dramedy.
It was a dramedy.
That was
so
the tone
we were trying
of
to
the
make
script.
people laugh.
That's right.
Everything's got to match the tone.
Right.
Everything's got to.
It's got a feel of a piece.
Yeah. And sometimes the tone is it's incredibly violent and humorous at the same time. But most often it's not. It has its own tone of the show, and you have to match it. But man, that is the hardest part, you know. And the worst thing you can do, I think, is you start someone off and you explain every single thing that's happening because then it counts. You've done it.
Right.
It works. Hey, I said it. You can't argue with me.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, I can't argue with you. I did read that paragraph, but I wasn't paying attention to about half of it because I wasn't emotionally connecting to the story, and it didn't land.
I don't need to know what color the wallpaper is. I don't know what kind of cheese is on the plate on the table. That has nothing to do with what's going on in the scene. All I care about is that emotional piece.
Right.
What are people feeling?
That's right. Now, I have been on the set with directors who say, well, this doesn't lay out the whole fight. Why didn't you write the whole fight? And I'm like, write the fight? You want me to write the fight? I'm going to tell you why they're fighting. I'm going to tell you what they want to accomplish.
That's what a stunt coordinator's for.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you everything about the character. But yeah, when it comes to whether it's a left or a right, I can write it. But I think the actor and the stunt coordinator do. And I sat there on Daredevil with the stunt coordinator and the actor and Charlie Cox, and we sat there and worked out the entire sequence. But in the script, it's all about how everybody feels and what they want.
Okay, let's get into this week's show.
Hello, Stacy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Stacy. It's Jim.
Hello.
And this is Sam. Welcome. Thank you for taking time out to be on this.
Yeah.
Come into our writer's room, your writer's room now.
Thank you for having me.
You're the creator of this show. And before we get into the idea of whatever it is, I know that you work with some famous producer and director, more famous as a director probably, And who's that?
Yes. It's Paul Verhoeven.
And so what do you do with him? What is that? How does that work?
Well, we used to have a Sony deal years ago. So that was when we actually worked on developing the projects. And, I was there the whole process, from the script meetings with the writers to the casting to being on set and then to post-production. So, at the time I was really young when I started with him. So I didn't realize how lucky I was.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
That's a
incredible.
full spectrum Hollywood exposure there.
But what you really wanted to do was work at Starbucks, and you were just trying to figure out how can I
I want to wait tables.
Yeah. But we did have disappointments too, because I still think our best project was a project called Crusade, which was about the first Crusade, which you could even consider like a Game of Thrones. And it was written by Waylon Green, and it had Arnold and Jennifer Connelly and John Turturro, and then the studio Carolco had to choose between two projects, and they didn't choose ours. So we were actually already building castles in Spain and siege equipment and all that stuff.
Wow.
So that was a bummer.
And did the other movie go on to become some huge blockbuster hit, or was it just like, really? You picked it?
I think it was Cutthroat Island.
No.
Oh.
No. Oh, my God.
That's a shame. I mean, yeah,
In
if
so
it
many
won an
directions.
Oscar or something, you'd be like, oh, okay, I guess that was actually better.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, but it happens.
so you have this ridiculously cool job. Why would you want to write television? What broke inside you?
Well, to be honest, as television is really the place to be now, because they make less movies and because TV, takes more chances, I think, than films do. They can be edgier. So also just, I love being in a room with other people, it's a very solitary thing, writing. So if you're able to be in another room and work on a collective project, I think that's fantastic. And I haven't had that opportunity. So
I'll say that was one of the big things for me and Sam. We're writing partners. We always have the benefit of having someone else to discuss things with and hash it out and procrastinate with. Mm-hmm. But it does make, we're both social people, and it was hard to be in a cave all the time and imagine a whole career where that's what you do is sit by yourself.
Yeah, and we had a not a blind alley, but when we got out here, we couldn't get into television, and it was the death of television. It was reality TV and basic cable.
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was on 5 nights a week or whatever.
Yeah, and The Sopranos was on, and that was cool, but it was only 1 or 2 shows on and The Wire,
HBO.
of course, but on HBO, and that was it. And it really hadn't. We weren't in peak TV or anything even like it. It was really going down, and so we wrote movies. And we actually ended up selling a few movies, none of which got made, but we just kept doing it. We would make just enough money to pay the rent while we were writing the movie, and then the minute we turned it into last draft, we were broke again.
we actually got partially paid in beer for one rewrite we did on a movie.
That's right. We did a rewrite.
Oh my God.
This guy paid us in cases of beer for part of it.
That's
I
right.
hope it was a good beer.
Yeah, he was the distributor in America for Tiger beer from Singapore.
Yeah.
For bizarre reasons, and so he just had cases and cases of Tiger beer around,
and he said, "Go take as much as you want." And I was like, "We are going to take so much beer."
We filled up the back of my Explorer with Tiger beer.
Yeah, and
Oh, that's fantastic.
It lasted a year.
yeah, it did last a long time, but that doesn't pay the rent. So, but the thing that really turned us off the movies, besides the fact that I think we both are just bigger television fans. We love movies, but we love TV more as fans. But also, I was like, look, okay, he's my best friend, but I don't want to sit in a room with him and only him for 40 hours a week.
Right.
I mean, it was just, it's much better in a room. And when we go on a television show, we joke around because we never see each other.
Right.
We'll be in the room together, but almost immediately we split the room into 2 rooms. He goes in one, I go the other, or I go work on a project. He goes to set. It's just so we just love moving around and doing a lot of different things. And is that something that appeals to you too?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I don't miss the 7 a.m. call times, but I miss the energy of the set and the crew and meeting people of all different backgrounds and being in the middle of Starship Troopers. We were in the middle of Casper, Wyoming, and Kadoka, South Dakota. So you kind of had to bond because you were the whole hotel,
Yeah,
the whole bar.
Those are really remote places to be shooting. That had to be interesting.
Yeah. we've shot in remote places too. It's something else. It's really great when you know every third person on the street.
It's true.
Yeah. And by the way, Starship Troopers, I watch that once a year. I love that movie. I always love that movie.
I'm in it. I have a cameo.
Do you?
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, one of the FedNet breaks. I'm blonde then.
So let's get to the writing thing. The when did you start writing, and like what made you do it? Did you just, and what was the first time you wrote something?
Oh, probably as a kid, but to be honest, my biggest problem is just procrastination and follow through.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the internet has made that so much worse. But yeah, as a kid, I wrote a little, but I took a screenwriting class in college. But until recently, I hadn't really, and I took I went through the Master of Satirical Writing program at Second City, which you write sketches, which was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But in long form, I just started taking the classes probably like, it was six years ago, maybe. I did some UCLA Extension and then some Writing Pad, which is a group here in LA.
Yeah. That's the way to do it, is to keep taking classes, and it forces you.
Anything that forces you to write is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I wrote some movies, screenwriting, film projects, not TV, way back when. But, other than I got some meetings, but it didn't really lead anywhere past that.
Right. And, and I remember when the meetings were so exciting, and you get, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to the studio a lot. I'm meeting with somebody, or this is so nice. And yes, we went to William Morris at one point, William Morris Endeavor, and the receptionist was, would you like still water, sparkling water, room temperature, cold? And I was like, this is lovely. Nothing ever came of any of these meetings.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
I will, taking classes at UCLA was not, it was interesting. It wasn't particularly useful, the classes we took, but I remember driving up through the hills, and we had just moved here from Minnesota, and we were driving up over the hills where there are a lot of eucalyptus trees, and I started associating that eucalyptus smell with feelings of desperation and fear and sadness.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And now he has a eucalyptus tree in his backyard.
It's true, and then it's true, and then eventually. Thanks for killing my punchline. So I went, but it's true. At some point, we got a show on the air after years of struggle, all of that, and with the money that I made on the show, I bought a new house in a nice town, in a nice neighborhood, at the top of a hill, and right in the backyard, the only tree in the backyard is a huge eucalyptus tree. And so the smell has definitely changed for me.
It's to remind you to be humble.
Yeah. There's so many. All I need is a blank screen.
I think that's what your family's for too.
Yeah.
It's true.
All right, so let's jump into your idea. Let's get the writers' room going. This is a real writers' room because we've now procrastinated for 10 minutes. But
right.
What tell us about your idea?
So it's a 1-hour dramedy. I am calling it Family Law and Disorder. And it's it's actually based on a true story about a young juvenile probation officer who's atoning for her own history as a high school hellion in her hometown's highly dysfunctional family law court.
I love it when you say atoning, because that tells me something. Well, it tells me something right away. So what's her name? What's the character?
Her name is Sarah McAllister.
Okay, Sarah. Okay, so she's a probation officer. She's not a probation officer. Well, first of all,
she is.
She is when we start the show, or not when she starts the show?
No, when we start the show right now on her worst day. So she wakes up in jail in her homecoming dress, and it's torn, and there's a light in her eye, and it turns out to be the sheriff's badge, and the sheriff happens to be her uncle. And she and her best pal on homecoming night went on a joyride in his sheriff's car and crashed it. And then they end up in jail together, or in separate, cells across from each other. But yeah, basically she's had the homecoming night from hell. It was fun until the crash.
All right. So, a couple questions. First of all, how long do you think the show's? Is this a half hour or is this an hour? And is this a drama? What's the tone? Those two things together.
It's dramedy, and it's an hour.
Why is it an hour? Why do you want it to be an hour, not a half hour, in today's climate where you have things like Ted Lasso and I'm blanking, but there's a lot.
Mozart in the Jungle.
Mozart. Well, that was a good one, which was a dramedy. But there's you have a feeling about that? Does it have to be, or Is that a choice?
It was a choice, I think, more so just because we're introducing a lot of characters, her family, and then the crazy judge who makes decisions based on his moods, and the community services director who has the young boys mow lawns and then keeps the money and is sometimes handcuffed.
Hold on. That's a lot of plot. Hold on. That's the fire hose. Okay, clearly you thought about this idea for a while.
Yeah, this been simmering, huh?
I've written a lot of drafts and I'm stuck because it's not quite working.
All right. So first of all, you want to do 45 minutes roughly because of real estate, because you have a lot of characters and you want to serve them, right? Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and because she's a probation officer, I call it serialized with procedural elements, because the difference with a probation officer is it's not always a one and done, because they have to follow these kids to make sure they're on the right track, so that can go throughout a season, a couple of kids.
That opens a lot of opportunities.
It really does, and that does take some real estate. There's no question about that. But more than that, it gives a structure that then you can actually use for 45 minutes. That's the good news.
And in that kind of structure, you can have as many interactions with kids as you want, or none in any given episode. You can handle it however you want to.
And I'd want to say that we've been working in streaming for the last few years, and some of the episodes get really long, like 50, 59 minutes. You get a lot up there. And now, I as a viewer, I'm starting to feel like those are too long. And as a TV, as a producer who's being asked to stay on a budget, that's hard too, because if it's a high budget show that we've been on, it's not two people sitting in a room talking all the time. It's two people
standing in the street talking, surrounded by visual effects and people in really expensive period costume.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of that, and so we're shooting in the streets of New York, and it goes on and on. So this sounds like a very makeable show. And have you ever seen, Jim, a show about a probation officer? Have you, Stacy?
I have not. They seem to. I don't know why they've avoided it, but they kind of have.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen it as pieces in different shows or TV series or movies, but I don't remember one that focused on it.
So here's what I like about this idea already. We're talking about, you said dramedy, but it's about probation officers, which is violence and sadness and struggle.
Right.
Right? Like the struggle to re-enter life, I would imagine, the struggle to redeem your sins, live with your sins, the abuse that got you into prison to begin with, whatever, all that stuff. And yet you want to go the dramedy way, which is, is counter, and it's just, which I think is really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's one thing with my boss, Paul Verhoeven, like with RoboCop and Total Recall even has some humor. Like, I think the humor I think it's a natural, like even horror. I always like the fun horror of the scare and then tension relief,
Mm-hmm. Sam and I are both big fans of Elmore Leonard and the Florida author.
Oh, Carl
Hiaasen, right? And it feels, and the things that make their writing so great is it feels like dramedy because it's drama, and it's drama to the people involved, but often what they're into is sort of small scale and sideways, or like Justified. Like most of the criminals in Justified are, they're not gangsters in New York, right? They're people involved in very small scale stuff that's important to them.
Well,
but
the big bad was Margot Martindale,
right?
In one or two of the seasons. I mean, that is, to make her a big bad is, and she was, she's amazing and everything. But in this one, while she was sitting there talking to a man that she had poisoned, and was going to die in front of her, she was Margot Martindale. It's like, talking in a little bit of vernacular. All right, so let's get to your idea.
Okay.
So I'm worried that if we hear the whole story, it's going to sound like plot, and we're not going to resonate. So maybe we could ask you some questions about it.
Yeah, I was curious, like, what is the thing, what do you think your main problem is? I mean, it feels like in this kind of show you have two jobs, right? One is to have an emotional story in your pilot that deeply connects us with the main character and hopefully, a few other people. And then to establish the tone of your world and have that comedic, dramatic element.
And to understand why this job is the best thing or the worst thing, ideally both, for Sarah, right? Why we want to hear why it has to be her that has this job. That it's not just a job; it's actually something more than a job.
I have a couple of things, so I guess I'll tell the main problems when she comes back. Basically, she goes off to college because the judge is her best friend's dad, and so he works it out so that she can
gets a
make
pass.
reparations.
Yeah.
Yeah, she can make reparations on her uncle's patrol car, which her uncle, the sheriff, is not happy about. So she actually graduates from college and thinks she's left this world behind when she gets arrested trying to go with her boyfriend to Paris because there's a warrant for her arrest because she hasn't paid off her reparations. So when she goes back to her small town, the judge, even though her uncle, the sheriff, doesn't want her to do this, makes her the juvenile probation officer to help pay it off and then to also serve her community because she was going off across the world to, save the planet when in fact her community could use her help now. And in that interim, the best friend she crashed the car with, the judge's daughter, and her have become estranged because the judge's daughter has an opiate addiction that she's recovering from now. So the heart of the opening is, or the first episode is her reconnecting with her pal Brenda.
And let's talk about her, because what you were just mentioning, it sounds like on the one hand she has dreams of accomplishing big things and saving the world. On the other hand, she winds up sucked back into this small town, which, she sounds to me like someone who, is running away from that kind of small town life and winds up sucked back in there, something like that.
Yeah, because of the drama, and her parents are getting divorced, and her mom's having a sexual awakening, and her dad's become a medicinal bud tender. So yeah, she's trying to run away because it's easier to help people you don't know sometimes.
All right, let's just take a breath here. Hold on, let's just take a breath. I want to talk about, first of all, I think this is a phenomenal show.
The milieu is great.
It's great, and there's so much pathos built in. The specificity that you have for each person's struggle already is great, and you don't have to live in it. Each one doesn't need a full story, an arc in the episode. When we wrote Haven, we definitely had A stories, B stories, sometimes C stories. Other shows have more. Some shows don't, just have one. But the idea that you have specificity for everybody, and if that becomes just implied in the pilot, and it makes me want to know more about them, that's enough. We don't need to tell a full story. So I'm responding. That's huge to me, right?
Yeah, it feels like I want to know about her, though. Like, what's her...
Right, and that's where I'm going, right? The thing is, she did this to herself, right? She didn't pay the fines. Stacy, why didn't she pay the fines? Because nothing happens by mistake. We don't want to have, I accidentally did it. You could. Right. You could say, she sent it to the wrong thing, and now that one mistake led to this huge thing. But I'm more interested in the idea.
Did she think she could get away with it? What was her?
That's telling something. What do you think?
Well, I think she thought she could get away with it because the judge has always gone a little easy on her, and also it's her uncle, although she should know better because he's one of those black and white Law and Order guys.
Well,
and she also, school got expensive, and she thought, I'll just pay it off whenever. And she thought she could get away with it.
Well, okay, this is great. This is, to me, the money right here, because if she thought she could get away with it, then there's a number of kinds of people that think you can get away with stuff like that, and one of them is an entitled person, right? And I'm just fleshing this out. It could be any number of versions, but if it was entitled, then did she do it? Did she secretly? And someone could say this, and you don't even have to answer the question. You just have to raise it. Did you do this because you didn't like it yourself? You didn't like yourself, so you didn't pay the fines. Maybe you thought you would get busted, and then you'd have to come back because the only way that you can be a real person, a good person, is by being in this town. Because wherever you go in the world, there you are. But if you come to this town, you could get fixed. And again, this isn't the whole show. This might just be the shitty version of the show. But it is a version where it's kind of A to B from an emotional place, which is she knew she was no good, that she had some elements about her that were wrong.
Well, there's something that's pulling her back here, right? Because she's not severing the umbilical cord. She's tied to this place, and she makes a series of decisions that not to actually sever that relationship.
Right. Any of that resonating, Stacy? Anything? Or
No. I think there's a part of her that probably knows she needs to go back and needs to prove to her town that she's made something of herself, even though they always just thought she was a screw up.
Okay, but that's very different, and that's okay.
Okay.
That's what we call, or TV writers will say a hat on a hat. But to me, it's just two ideas. And I'm not saying you can't have two ideas, but we always want to separate them out. And in this case, the two ideas are, one, she is coming home to be fixed, that in a way, or she's coming home to be healed. She knows there's something wrong with her. She breaks this rule. This is my pitch. I'm not saying it's the right one. I'm just saying, and the one you just said is she's coming home because of what? Can you say it again? I'm sorry.
Oh, just because she wants to prove to her community
Right.
she's not a screw up.
I'm going to throw a pitch back at you, Sam.
You could combine them, couldn't you?
You can, right?
Yes,
Because
I
there's
know where you're going.
there's that thing with characters. So
Right.
there's what they want, and then there's what they need.
Yeah.
Right. And she wants to prove herself, but what she needs is to complete herself, which means there's a hole in her somewhere, in her
Right.
character, that we would want to see, that somehow this town is, we understand early on it's going to fix in some way.
Well, maybe it's that she wants to be, she wants to come back and prove to everybody that she's not that person. But what she needs is for that town to help her not be that person, because she
Right.
knows inside they're right. That's the thing. She knows they're right. The judge is right, or the uncle who's law and order. He's the one who says to her, you know, this is the bad version. If you don't like it, it was Jim. So just so we're clear. But
I'm throwing
he's the
my
one who
voice.
says, basically, you need this town more than the town needs you. That's the terrible version, that the line that comes up towards the end, or comes up at the end of Act 1. Either way, but it's that idea of, am I going anywhere? Besides nowhere?
Yeah, no.
Well, I guess, and off of what you're saying, Sam, it feels like there's look, I come from a very small town of about 5,000 people in rural Indiana, right? So I feel some connection to the story.
I knew you would. That was one of my 8
Right.
reasons you were going to like it. The other one was the bud tender,
Right,
all the
I'm
all the
from
quirky
Ohio.
stuff.
right, and so, but it feels like there's a little bit of It's a Wonderful Life maybe in here, of the person who wants to go, has this appetite for other things and thinks they need to be this other person who goes out into the world and has dreams of, some fantastic version of themselves, but actually what they need is here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that there's some obligation, there's some hole in this world that they, it's the puzzle of this town. They are the jigsaw puzzle piece that fits in that gap.
Mm-hmm.
And other people see that and they don't, or they feel there's some responsibility they're supposed to fulfill, something they're supposed to do here that they're setting aside, but they should stay and deal with it.
Yeah, and it's a question of the external pressure to be in this town. That's all the reality of, well, you have to stay, you have to pay off your debt. That's all external.
Right.
And that, it's not plot, but it feels like it. You don't connect to it.
It's thin. That's an excuse or a cause. It's not
Right.
a.
And by the way, there have been hugely successful movies with nothing but external pressure, right? Or they make up some internal pressure where, oh, I know, we're going to kill the family of the action star in the first few minutes.
Right. Now they're out for revenge.
Now they're out for revenge the whole time, and that was big for a while. And now it's they're struggling with something along the way, PTSD from something because they were a cop and they saw too much, and redemption, and you just get into all that stuff. People trying to get into that, and this is why I love TV more, because you can, that stuff you don't have to shorthand it, because we've got hopefully 50 episodes to dig into that. So what is what's her internal drive to you? Is it the proving, and what else? Is there anything associated with that? Is it proving and then she realizes they're right?
And she also wants to reconnect with her friend who has the opiate addiction, because they were super close when they were kids.
Yeah.
They were like sisters. And then I have an idea which I don't know if we see or we talk about, where when Brenda's in the height of her addiction, she comes to Northwestern, where Sarah's going to college, and almost, causes such a ruckus. She almost gets Sarah in big trouble and kicked out, and Sarah cuts her off.
And that's in a
But
later
she
episode.
misses her.
That's a later
Yeah,
episode. Yeah.
later episode. Okay.
But so why is she going to France if she wants to reconnect with her friend? You know what I mean?
When she's back in the town, she realizes she could reconnect. But I think when she's in Chicago and, in this other world, and she's someone else, really, she's a person she's created, that she can avoid it. Like, even like avoiding her parents who are going through this divorce, and
That
her
makes
parents.
sense to me. That makes sense, right?
Okay.
I think I'm looking at Jimmy's processing, but to me, she's running away. and then she's brought to the very thing that she's running away from, is a great character situation. I mean, you could look at Northern Exposure, which is nothing like this, but because that was total just straight ahead, great show, amazing show, but that was fish out of water. This isn't fish out of water because she knows everybody there. She's been part of this community, and that's what I find so intriguing about it. But I'm going to ask you a crazy question, which is, why does she want to help her friend? And let me. That's a weird question, but
because she's not a sociopath,
right? But what I'm asking is, what is her specific reason for helping her friend? We all want to help our friends, right? And but she has to have a reason to do it. That is interesting to us. For example, it could be guilt. That's a simple one, right? There's a reason why she wants to help her friend. There's something driving her to help this friend. And what is it? The bad version again is you put the, she got her stoned the first time. They just smoked pot. They were in high school and they smoked pot together. Or that night they smoked pot, and that's how they ended up in the thing. They were smoking pot and drinking. They end up in the clinker together. And now, fast forward 4 years or whatever it is, she's gone to college. She's had a life. And that put off rang a bell in her friend's head, and she's gone down this road of addiction. And I just, before you answer, I just want, and I really want to hear all of your thoughts. I just want to say, this is because Jim and I are going to do this one thing, which is we're going to keep drilling on her central drive. Because that is, if we keep doing that, we're going to start peeling. You started by saying I have too many ideas. I'm going to say any idea that doesn't serve that, let's just save it. And you can do the writer trick, with Jim and I always, we're like, hey, we'll save that for episode 2. And that meaning we're not going to kill it. We're putting it over there. There never will be an episode 2. but let's just pretend like that's a safe area for our little baby. It's a crib. And we'll put our baby. We're not going to kill him. We're just going to put him there. All right. So why does she want to help her friend?
I think, well, A, because they were like sisters. But B, she does feel guilt. The biggest thing is probably A, because when they were driving the patrol car and it crashed, Sarah was driving. And that's how Brenda was first given her opiate prescription.
There you go. There you go. Beautiful. And now you get a twofer on it, right? Which is what there's hat on a hat and twofer, and we, and they're very different. I mean,
if it works, it's a twofer. If it doesn't work, it's a hat on a hat.
That's kind of true. But a hat on a hat is two ideas that don't help each other. They just confuse the issue. But that's extremely helps. And by the way, you keep going back to that accident, because that accident has caused everything. It changed Sarah's life. It changed. What's the friend's name?
Brenda.
It changed Brenda's life. I mean, that's great. You do have.
Yeah, and I think the idea. Thank you. I think the idea with also being a probation officer is like sometimes these kids, one thing can change their entire life for and they can't go back.
Right. And I think that's a great moral through line. It is that she's giving back this way.
Stacy, how much of the show, I mean, you've mentioned a couple ideas that we were going to see in sort of flashback, or that we're maybe going back to her high school time. Do you see that as an every episode kind of thing where we see pieces from her past?
That's a good question. I hadn't, but then the more I work on it, the more I feel like we might need to see some of the past, since that's what while she's, dealing with a kid, one of her wards, she also is going through, the Brenda situation.
Because there's a lot of, you've done some really nice work in just the little things you've mentioned along the way that I get the comedy side of the dramedy element, right? Like there's great funny situations set up and things that you've got going on. But what I'm looking for is the pathos, right? Is that deep emotional stuff where we peel back what's fucked up in her and her world. And it feels like if we're going back to the past, that's going to give us the answers where we start seeing why she is where she is now, what she was running from, why she really has to be back. And that's going to be, right now, it feels like it comes from her friend who she damaged in a way that has seemingly destroyed or threatens to destroy her friend's life. And then, with her parents, right? Does she feel somehow responsible for her parents' divorce, or that she played a role in it, or didn't play a role in it? Was she the mediator and she left and they fell apart? Or
Well,
that's a good question, and I haven't thought. I mean, I feel like she feels trapped in the middle, but yeah, it's again the thing where she ran. What I have now is the thing where she ran away, and she just has tried to not come home as much as possible, so she didn't have to deal with it.
Well, and I like that, and but I want to put a maybe not a surgeon's general warning on what Jim just said, maybe a writer's warning on what he said, which is with flashbacks. So flashbacks, especially in pilots, to me, and this is, you get 3 writers talking about this, and you're gonna have 6 opinions. So the thing about it is they're a crutch. You can use them, and they can be momentum killers. They can be beautiful things that really reveal the soul of the character and how they got to this place. They can be overused. Jim and I wrote a pilot that never got made, but we're very proud of it, and it got us a lot of meetings and a lot of jobs, and up until now, it's been our sample. And the first note we got from writers we respected was we have 3 flashbacks in there for the main character, and they wanted them out, and we left them in, by the way. So we go back and forth.
Or they didn't want us to reveal the whole story we told in the flashbacks.
Right.
And we were like, no, because this is the only script people are ever going to see of the show. So we're going to tell the whole story so that people understand the character and they go, oh, this is great.
But they were right. If it was a show, we might have taken it out and then, depending on the network, and peeled it, doled that out over time. So flashbacks are dangerous. Also, if you have a lot of story, well, flashbacks are more story. They are great story because they're explaining the primary story, so you understand the emotional arc, and it's helping it. But it is more story. So this is a dangerous thing Jim has pitched, but it's something that can be extremely effective. And by the way, I love flashbacks, especially later in the series when you know these people already, and then we go into their backstory and we learn stuff that you can only learn in flashback. So it's a good thing, but a bad thing, but a good thing, but a bad thing. And that's the kind of advice we give here on the Writers' Room.
The way I have it now is like I said, I open with her worst day when they are teenagers and they're in jail together. And then we, after that teaser and the courtroom scene where we see how crazy the court is, then we cut to immediately like her 4 years later. But yeah, as I've thought about it and why I can't get it to work, that's why I wasn't sure where flashbacks would help or not.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love starting 4 years ago, and then you have a scene or two, and then you come back to and then you start in the present, and now we're in the present. I think it's great. And a lot of the stuff that you imply that when her Brenda maybe at some point says, leave me alone. You're the one who got me into this. That's going to be so powerful when she's angry and she says those things to our lead, and our lead feels like, yeah, she did. I don't know if I have to see it.
Or rejects it and comes around to it.
Yeah, pick your right. That's better than what I just pitched. But it's the idea of, that is the good stuff. That's the stuff that I want to see in present day. I don't need to see in flashback.
Okay.
So you've done a lot of drafts of this, and you've done it for a reason, right? It's not holding together for some reason. What specifically is the thing that's not clicking for you or for your readers?
Well, I don't know if I'm also trying to establish the courthouse, and then with her first day with her ward, the ward steals the probation car, and that becomes like a running joke because the whole town is looking for it, Where's Waldo style. I don't know if I'm still just trying to do too much, which is often my problem.
It sounds to me like a question of emphasis, right? And job one is what is your character's arc, right? Where is she starting? It sounds like this is a woman who has, we see the accident. She left the town. Now she's gotten pulled back against her will. She's dropped into this situation. And her story is to realize, while she's trapped here, she's got to live with it. So I assume you get that comedic pushback, right? Where she doesn't want to be here. No, this is not me. But the reality is, yes, you belong here, and you need to reconnect to these people in order to reclaim your soul or to be a better person or whatever her flaw is. And it feels like we need her flaw or the hole in her world that this place answers. And then how do we see that across the pilot? And once you have that story of how do we get on her team, on Team Sarah here, that's the spine of the show, and all the rest of that stuff can be saved for episode 2, or used to illustrate her story, because her story is the only thing that matters. The rest of it's all bullshit.
Yeah, that's the hard truth. Wow, you just said it like that. That's brutal, but completely true. Completely true.
Yeah, I may go into the Ward story a little too much in the first one because that's where the balance has been tough. Because yes, I want to show her in this new role as a probation officer, but the main through line on the first episode when she comes back is her and her friend Brenda and her own mistakes she's made and rectifying that.
Well, that should be the same story.
Right. How does that reflect back on her? Like, whoever she's interacting with in this first episode, those events and those stories should illuminate pieces of her and her own story in ways that surprise her, or that certainly surprise us as an audience.
Here's the pitch. Here's the bad pitch, which is on the personal line with Brenda. We find out what a selfish person she was 4 years ago, and why selfish. It's something led to that driving along, and that character, that negative characteristic of our character, of Sarah. And then on the plot line, and it's not plot, it's story, but on her professional line, we get to see her get to a fork where she realizes she needs to do the selfless act on that line, and she does it. It's just a little thing, but that's the piece that she needed. That's what she realizes she has to keep doing that in this show to fix the fact that she was selfish, was whatever all the things that we're talking about for her.
To simplify that, it feels like she's someone who's run away from taking care of other people, and now she's landed in a situation where she has to help take care of other people.
Yeah, although I think that might be too general in a way. I'm worried about take care is sort of like a...
I'm just trying to get to the, like, what's the touchstone, right? Like, what are we seeing, and how does it reveal that?
What do you think? What do you think? First of all, Jim's wrong, right?
I'm just repeating what you said last week.
I can learn from everyone.
You're going to go far, Stacy.
But is anything landing for you? Is anything making sense? Because there's a million versions of this. It doesn't have to be this version. We're just trying to pitch to give specificity to it, so maybe it'll make more sense.
Yeah, no, it is making sense, because now I'm thinking, and it's just something that came up when I was workshopping it. I made it too easy in the pilot for Brenda and Sarah to reconnect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they reconnect very early in the first act, and Brenda, says a few things and they allude to what happened. But I think I need to make it harder for her to win Brenda's trust again.
That's really, really good. That's really smart.
And I guess what I'm looking for too from Sarah is, what are her flaws? Like, it feels like for this character to work, for the premise to work, this kind of a story is always about someone who has a vision of themselves and their future that they're chasing, and they're forced to confront people from their past, and they realize, there are gaping holes in my vision of myself. Yeah. I'm very wrong about things. People think I'm arrogant, or people, whatever it is, right? Like, there's some...
She had no idea.
She had no idea, and she's forced to confront what people really think of her, and what she really needs.
And what's great about that is that version is she's finding out at the same time we're finding out.
Right. So
she's having emotional reactions to this, and so are we with her. And it's not an expositional scene where, well, you were like this. It's she's in it. And she had no idea. She didn't realize it was that important, or that she was that bad, or whatever those things. Maybe she knew it on some level, which is why she didn't pay her fines. He says, subtly bringing in his first pitch to make it essential, so you can't toss it. Right. But I'm just trying to tie it together, right? Is this idea of she knows, and everyone deals with knowing the crappy stuff that they have done in their life. Maybe they know at 3:00 in the morning when they have anxiety. Maybe it comes up on them when they're driving. But for her, and maybe they deal with it with alcohol or pills or sex or whatever it is. And for her, she dealt with it. She was in pain, and she dealt with it by not paying the fine, knowing that it would get her brought back, which she may not realize. She does not realize at the time.
Right. Somebody may call her out on that, and she'll say, no.
Yeah.
It's not that.
It's not that. And the thing is, again, it's not about the specifics. We're just trying to illustrate everything goes back to those first scenes, because you're important. And that moment, by the way, when we realize some of this, that's usually the end of Act 1, because that's what the show's about, right? You have 5 acts, say 4 acts, pick a number, and then But at the end of that first act, that's that big turn.
Where you set the hook.
Where you set the hook, and it's about the character, not just the show, right? Where you're like, oh, okay, this is, and that could be when she gets the probation job, or it could be when she gets the probation job and she completely screws it up because she's selfish.
I think she's impulsive. Yeah, she's very impulsive and quick to jump into the fray, and that hurts her.
Why is she that way, though? Because I could jump into the fray because I just want to help. I just want to help because I'm such a generous person, but I'm impulsive. Is that who she is?
Yeah, I think she's headstrong and self-righteous a bit.
Well, that you have to figure out how to line that up. If you're going to do the thing that we've been pitching about her selfishness, it has to be throughout the whole thing. It can't be she's selfish and she's impulsive because she just can't wait. She can be impulsive because she values her opinion more than anybody else because she's selfish.
That's part of the selfish.
Yeah,
right.
You could do it that way if you put that angle on it. But you have to ask yourself every single move, how is this coming out of that character?
Okay.
Why is it? If it's not, and that's goes to your core problem that you were talking about, that you came in with, which was too many good ideas, which if you're not measuring your ideas against that yardstick, then it's not a good idea. It's just a funny idea, or it's just a charming idea, or it's just a really cool action sequence, or it's just whatever. But if it doesn't measure up against whatever that core thing is, it's actually not a good idea, and it gets
in the
way.
Especially, it's a real trap as writers. We tend to write things that we like or that work for some reason. They work in the scene, or it works because it's funny, or it works because whatever. But it's actually turns out it's a scene that doesn't belong in your show, or an idea that doesn't belong in your show. Something I've started doing the past few years a lot is I sit down and I write out an order of argument. It's a series of if-then statements, right? Where you're realizing things in the story about a person or about a situation, and you just go through and anything that isn't helping that chain of how you get from A to B in an arc across your episode. Oh, this is how I understand that. Oh, she's actually selfish and she doesn't even realize it, or whatever that arc is for her character. If it doesn't move that agenda, you just push it aside, and maybe it finds some way to come back in. But until you have that central story, everything else is extraneous.
No, and I'm starting to see I'm trying to make her too likable, probably, which is something that can be a problem if you want your character to have an interesting arc. So I might have been protecting her too much by just saying impulsive instead of selfish.
Well, maybe. And protecting our characters is definitely error number one that everybody does.
When we were on Hand of God, our showrunner Ben Watkins, we were writing. Sam and I were working together on some scene with it was an arc in an episode for Dana Delaney's character, right? And we had this confrontation with someone else, and he was like, and he looked at us like, "You're protecting the character. Why doesn't this person punch her in the face?" We're like, "Huh?" But he was right, because everything we were doing was about protecting the character, because you're kind of taught to think that way in TV. But the reality is, in that situation, the other person should have punched her in the face.
Yeah. And that's something that happens. We just pull back, and I think it's true in comedy. Big Mouth, which Jim and I are big fans of, they just go for it all the time with their characters. They do things that are really dumb, stupid stuff that we did in middle school, and it makes them authentic.
Right. So that's why it resonates, because we all recognize it.
So I love the bud tender stuff, and I love sexual awakening of the mother stuff. But you are still going to have to ask yourself at some point, number one, how does that story impact Sarah? Because she's the lead. And two, why is she having a sexual awakening? And why does he want to be a bud tender? And it can't be because he's always liked pot and he thought he would do it. It's got to answer some question for him in some way.
And this is the house she was raised in, with these people who have bloomed into these people, right? Who are making these radical choices now. So what happened? How does that shape her? What does it say about her?
And because it all comes back to Sarah. And if she's your North Star, and it's not that these other people don't have their own stories, but because they all reflect on her, everything's relevant.
Right.
Right. And then you don't feel like when they're in a scene, you're like, oh, I'm dealing with the mother now. No, you're dealing with Sarah's mother. You know? Right. Not a lady who is of X age or whatever. It's extremely important, and most importantly, uncuttable.
I was just thinking the same thought. It's uncuttable. Like that's one of those like miracle things you figure out over time is what is cuttable and what's not cuttable. Right. And you look at scenes and go, well, if I didn't tell this scene, would I still understand the story? If the answer is yes, then it does not belong in your story.
Right. This does not explain why Jim and I are on draft 7 of our pilot right now.
10.
So it's always good to know the rules, know the strategy, but then actually writing them,
That's another thing entirely.
That's another thing entirely.
Well, how long have you guys been working on that? Because this one's been years and way too many drafts.
Well, this one has been a couple years, but the thing is,
it keeps interrupted by work. Like we get a job and put it down.
And then the jobs that we've been on have not been, hey, let's just write for 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And they're full on
24/7 kind of work.
And then you're like, we literally, when we were working on it, we were unemployed, and which we like now, and we got the call that we were getting an offer from Daredevil. And that the offer was going to be good enough so that we could take it. And Jim took the whiteboard that we were working on and wheeled it from his deck where we were working down into the garage, and there it sat, untouched until we were done with Daredevil.
Like a year later, we wheeled it back out onto the deck, and we're like, "Oh, this is where we left off. Look, the cards are still pinned onto the whiteboard."
Oh, and the other thing was, God, I remember this being much better than it was.
Why is this person doing this? This doesn't make any sense at all.
So I say that just to say we're with you. We know.
Okay, good.
All right. Before we go, is there any questions or anything that we didn't address properly, or that you want to know about?
No, I think this has been really helpful because I really write more in a series of, I like this idea, I like the scene, and I don't really look at it from that going back over and over to my lead and her issues.
That is so important, by the way, that you know what your tendency is, because we all have them. Right. It's like the shopping cart that pulls to the left, and you know that you pull to the left, so you got to push to the right a little bit. And for me, one thing that I'm really solid on is the making sure a scene is structured right. I get a turn. I know what's moving. Right. The thing that I have to force myself to look at after I make a scene right, I go back is, did I have the people say explicitly or implicitly sometimes, but what is happening with them emotionally through that scene? Because I think I have it, but I always think I have more than I actually do. So when I go back, I realize I know that's about me, and I've known that for years. So I go back, and I think all the emotions there. It's in the outline. I know what I want to do, and then I look at it, and I'm like, no, it's not clear enough. It's not out enough. And sometimes I have to re-break the scene because I can't have somebody just say, oh, I'm feeling this way at this moment. I have to craft it to do it, and that's my pulling to the left thing. Jim, what's your pulling to the left?
Rewriting you.
Okay, Jim is my pull to the left. Yeah.
You're like a weight on my chest, Ernst.
So it's important to know what it is, though, with you. And you just nailed it. You know what your thing is. So be triple sure when you do something, am I doing that thing? And it'll save you time.
Okay.
My thing is actually the opposite of Sam's. It's one of the reasons we're good partners. I tend to over-explicate. I want to put in the action line. I want to make it too novelistic and explain what everyone's doing and exactly why, and set every moment and block it all out in ways that ultimately you can pare away, because it doesn't matter. As long as Sam's saying, if you've clearly stated what people's emotions are and made it evident in a way in the dialogue or the interaction between two people, everything else, like, the setting, the room, all that kind of stuff, almost never matters in TV, because you're going to move it into 7 different sets by the time you're done anyway.
Yeah, and so it's all degrees, right? We're talking about a percent or 2 or 3 each way, but if you keep building on that, you're out of sync out there. I'm mixing it, but if you're pointing the wrong direction by just 1 or 2, and then you write 25 scenes, you're going to be really not landing where you want to land. So you have to protect that as you go, whatever thing is for you.
That makes sense, because the problem is I start to feel a lag in the middle, the middle muddle, and that's because I'm not hitting this anymore. I'm going off into I think this is funny, so I want to put it in.
Right. Stacy, it was awesome talking to you.
And this is a great idea, Stacy.
Yeah, this is
really good. This works.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm from a small town too, and so I know the craziness there is, like, I think much more than you get even in the big city.
Yeah,
I agree. I moved from New York City to St. Paul, Minnesota, and when people talk to me, they'd be like, "Wow, New York, man, that's just so crazy." And then as I got to know the Midwest, I was like, It's like, are you nuts? I was driving in Nebraska, and I pulled into a road, to a diner, and got breakfast at 5 o'clock in the morning. There's literally farmers talking about cows getting out onto the highway in bib overalls. It was a little on the nose, and I was so struck by the whole thing. And then I went to the bathroom, and there was a sex toy machine in the bathroom. And that's your show, Stacy.
Yeah.
And then Jim, of course, is always telling me stories about small town and when the bikers took over the VFW, and I'm like, this is what? So it's just people. It's just people. It's all true. It's just people wherever they are.
It's true. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the guidance.
Thanks, Stacy.
All right. Thanks, Stacy.
Be well.
Good luck. And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Buddha-Rays out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Sam and Jim on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writers' Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.